Hi everybody, before we start, I just want to invite you to stay till the end. We have some important news and updates regarding our channel, and I hope that you check that out because it could be really cool. See you then. Hello everybody and welcome to the Death Mountaineers. My name is Maikeru. Alright, so today we are going to be looking into a company that has gotten a lot of praise and a lot of flack for some of its business decision making. That company is of course Nintendo. Now, I love Nintendo. I grew up with Nintendo. I have gotten every single one of the consoles except for the Wii on time, and people have gone so far as to even call me a fanboy. However people choose to identify me, regardless, we are still going to be looking into the top 10 reasons why I think Nintendo's the shit.
Mike's Top 10. Number 10.
Nintendo was the first console that I ever had. I was born in late September of 1991 and the Super Nintendo had just come out, and my parents, being young, decided to pick one up. Now, because of this, I don't remember ever having a time in my life where I didn't have a video game console in my home. Even when I went to other places like my grandparents' houses, they also had video game systems because, again, my parents were young, so their brothers and sisters were relatively young as well. I remember my uncle in particular had an Atari 2600, so I was able to play that when I went to my grandma's house, and it was pretty fucking cool. I always thought it was super interesting looking at different video game consoles and seeing the differences between the cartridges and the controllers and the way that they played on the TV. But for me, the main thing was Nintendo, and I had the Super Nintendo at my house and I would play video games with my parents. Now also because of this, some of my first memories are of playing video games, in particular Super Mario World and Donkey Kong Country, as well as Pitfall and Space Invaders on the Atari 2600. I've been told before that I was able to pick up a controller and play video games before I was able to walk or talk. But because of the simple fact that the Super Nintendo was the first console I ever owned and I had it pretty much since birth, Super Nintendo holds some of my favorite games of all time. Still to this day, I pick them up and play them regularly. Things like Super Mario World, Donkey Kong Country 1, 2, and 3, Animaniacs, Buster Bust Loose from the Tiny Toons, Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy 2 or 3, or 4 or 6, depending on if you're that type of person, Super Street Fighter 2, Killer Instinct, and let's not forget my all-time favorite Super Nintendo game, Yoshi's Island.
Number 9.
I really didn't have any other choice. See, when I was a kid in the early 90s, the video game companies were under a ton of political scrutiny due to violence and graphic nature within them. My parents may have been young, but they had a very conservative plan when it came to my upbringing and didn't want me viewing this kind of material. At the time, and even still today, Nintendo tried to put forward the fact that it was a family-friendly company, and they did censor quite a bit of material within video games like Mortal Kombat, so it only made sense that they would continue to get Nintendo consoles as I grew up. But unfortunately for me, and unfortunately for Nintendo, this made Nintendo look not cool. So all my friends had Sega Genesises. Genesis? How do you do that? But that actually worked out for me because not only was I able to play all my favorite Super Nintendo games, but I was able to go over my friends' houses as well and play their Sega Genesis, which then in turn allowed me to have a broad range of video games under my belt as I grew up. It was really cool. And as time went on, as the PlayStation and Xbox came out, I was still getting the Nintendo consoles, even though it really wasn't that big a deal what I was playing at that point. And during that time, Nintendo started to kind of creep down in popularity, so I got to enjoy all the Xbox and PlayStation games at my friend's house as well. So only having Nintendo consoles growing up actually worked out for me because nobody else seemed to really have them. So not only did I get experience with all the other consoles and all the other games, but I got to experience Nintendo products on my own time.
Number 8.
Super Mario 64 blew my fucking mind. I was able to get the Nintendo 64 pretty much right when it came out, which was awesome. But at that point, I had 6 or 7 years of 2D games under my belt, and that was all I knew. See, for the more casual gamers at the time, the only real directions people were able to go within a video game was left and right or up and down. Even in an exploring video game for a console, generally it was a top-down view like Zelda: A Link to the Past. But when Mario 64 came out, not only were we given a new console, a new controller, and a brand new Mario game, but we were given a whole new dimension to work with. Because at that point, I hadn't really done any PC PC gaming and I didn't have a Sega Saturn, I had never seen anything like that before. And what's more important is that this right here on the Nintendo 64 controller was totally new to me. I had never seen an analog stick before in my life, so operating this thing was absolutely fucking crazy. My first memory of playing the game was loading it up, being super excited, it was the craziest thing I had ever seen in my life, and then doing a whole lot of this, trying to move Mario. It didn't make sense to me that Mario could run towards the back of the television screen. Other games have blown my mind in different ways, but never like Super Mario 64. For instance, I remember playing Halo for the first time, shooting the needler and having the needle come out, home into an enemy, stick in him, and then explode with a little spray of blood. And I remember watching that and thinking it was the coolest thing in the world. Or the first time that I was able to actually manipulate an environment for real within a game. I believe it was Perfect Dark for the 360, when you could shoot a computer screen and the screen would crack and go flying off the fucking desk or whatever it was on. That was really, really cool for me. But that first step into the third dimension was something I never expected.
Number 7.
The GameCube controller is the best controller ever. Now, if you've been following us for a while, you probably know that I don't have a lot of my GameCube stuff left. It was stolen from me. And that's including my controllers. Unfortunately, the only one I have is this shitty GameStop one. Even still, the way that the GameCube controller fits your hand perfectly, it is the best design I have ever felt for a controller ever. The L&R bumpers have awesome bounce to them and 2 different points of contact within the button. You got a little Z here, and the best thing about it is that your thumb can hit all the buttons easily, as the biggest and most important, the A button, is centrally located. And I don't know why, but this tiny little D-pad just works so well. But honestly, the best thing is just the way that it feels when you're holding it. It's got grip everywhere you need it to be. And these 2 little spots back here feel really good on these fingers. I wish that I had a GameCube controller for every single console that I owned. If I had the choice, it would be the only controller I would ever use.
Number 6.
Now, there's a term that you might have heard somewhere on YouTube or on the internet, and it's Nintendo polish. Now, as somebody who looks deep into games for things like story and presentation and character development and gameplay, one thing that you can always be assured is that a Nintendo game is going to be good. If this is a first-party game developed by Nintendo Studios, it is going to look amazing and stylized, it is going to sound great, and it's gonna be fun no matter what. Any of the Donkey Kong games, things like Star Fox 64, Zelda, Pokemon, you know that these games are going to be innovative and special and just have that shine that Nintendo likes to put on everything. Now, you can say what you want about the company and their shady business tactics, but when it comes down to loving their games and being invested in them, and more importantly, taking development seriously and caring about the final product, Nintendo is second to none.
Number 5.
Nintendo beat Sega. Now, if you're somewhere in my age range, you probably remember something now referred to as the Console Wars. This is a battle that was waged between Nintendo and Sega in the early 90s and the late 80s, and also something that was waged between their fans from the office to the school bus. I remember getting in arguments with people all the time over which was better, Sega or Nintendo. Now, unfortunately for Sega in the late 90s, they made some business mistakes that inevitably ended up making them fail. Which is unfortunate because Sega Dreamcast, the last console put out by the company, is one of my favorite consoles of all time. It was extremely innovative, the graphics were cool, the controllers were awesome, and it was the first gaming console to ever utilize online in the way that it did. But unfortunately, with the PlayStation 2 coming out, the Xbox and the GameCube on its way, the Dreamcast just didn't really have a foot in the market. So after all this time, Sega just gave up making consoles and started putting out their games on Nintendo systems. If you think about it this way, it would be like a Zelda game coming out on the PlayStation. It would just be fucking crazy. But regardless, Nintendo won the console wars, and now they make money from Sega.
Number 4.
The Ocarina of Time is one of the best games ever made. Alright, forget the rest of the Zelda franchise, which everybody knows is amazing. If we were only left with the Ocarina of Time, I don't know if I could complain. Now, I remember before this game came out, and if you think the hype for Breath of the Wild was crazy, you should have seen the hype for the Ocarina of Time. See, back then the internet wasn't really that much of a thing, so all you had was word of mouth. So people who were interested in these kinds of things, like gaming and gaming news, didn't really have a ton of places to go, so speculation was crazy back then. I remember my uncle in particular was super invested in getting to know things about this game before it came out. And believe me, people were waiting. Just like Breath of the Wild, and honestly most of the Zelda games, they announced it years before the game came out. And by the time that it did come out, it looked completely different from what we were expecting. But every time I went over to my uncle's house, he would talk to me about the new game and show me the new ad in the Nintendo Power magazines or this interview with this person. Like, I was too young, I didn't fucking know what the hell was going on, but I know for a fact that I was excited about this game. Now, I remember putting the game in and watching the cutscenes and just being amazed. It was something I had never really seen before, and again, the third-person action-adventure games were kind of really just coming into their own on consoles at that time, so this was really a new experience, and the Z targeting system was revolutionary for the time. But again, being 6 to 8 at the time, you're really just starting to get into reading and books, and Zelda takes a lot of critical thought and puzzle-solving abilities and a good reading level. So my uncle sat down and played the game with me and basically told me what to do, and I just controlled the characters. But the other problem that I had was that Zelda scared the fucking shit out of me. I had nightmares about the Redeads and the Stalfos and everything like that. It was terrifying. I think it might have something to do with the particularly lonely atmosphere of the Ocarina of Time. I may have not been the brightest kid, but I was emotionally intuitive, and it was sad to me to see all of Link's friends disappear, and I realized that when he grew up, that he had left everything behind, and all of his friends from his childhood end up dying. Spoilers. Regardless, the Ocarina of Time is an amazing achievement for all of video games, and a great point in video game history. The game, the console that it came out on, and the whole entire franchise belongs to Nintendo.
Number 3.
Going from one amazing IP to another, let's just take a minute and talk about Pokemon. Now, if you weren't somewhere between 6 and 10 in 1997 when Pokemon hit the Western world, you missed out on one of the craziest pop culture phenomenons to ever happen. To this day, Pokemon is still one of the most popular and widely played franchise across many age groups. Not to mention, it's one of the most complicated and strategic RPGs in the competitive circuit. But when Pokemon came out when I was a kid, it became my entire life. All of my friends were into Pokemon. We collected the cards, we played the games, we played Pokemon Stadium, we played Pokemon Snap, we played Hey You Pikachu. In our free time, we watched the animes, we had the merch, we had the clothing, we had Ash's hat, we had the fucking little Pokeballs, and you throw them and the Pokemon don't come out, they just kind of flop on the floor. And then there was the McDonald's toys, and I even remember going down to the mall when I was a kid on Saturday mornings to play in the competitive Pokemon card game league that they had at the Toys R Us at the time. There was no escaping this franchise. Behind all of that is one of the best video games that I've ever played. This is my original copy of Pokemon Red for the regular Game Boy. I cannot tell you how many hours I clocked into this game when I was a kid, but I never, not until that point, had experienced a game that I loved this much. I think even if Nintendo didn't have other insanely popular mascots and franchises and IPs, if it only had Pokemon, it would still be in the contender for one of the best video game companies of all time. Now, I realize that Nintendo didn't create Pokemon, Game Freak did, but Nintendo owns that property, so it's still theirs.
Number 2.
So what's better than having some of the top IPs in the world when it comes to gaming? Well, the answer is being able to put all of them into one game and have them beat the shit out of each other. Super Smash Bros. Is one of the coolest ideas that ever happened in video gaming. I remember specifically when I saw the first commercial for it. It was a really weird 35 seconds of people in Nintendo costumes beating the crap out of each other. It showed you some of the characters that were going to be in the game, including Mario, Donkey Kong, Yoshi, Kirby, and Pikachu. Now, knowing how everybody felt about Pokemon at the time, adding Pikachu into the game was a genius move. I can tell you that that's 95% of the reason that I got Super Smash Bros. In the first place. Being able to one-to-one control a Pokemon for the first time was awesome. Each version of the game got bigger and better with more stages, more characters, and more super moves. Not only that, but the best part was how easy it was to sit down with your friends and just have a crazy time beating each other up. But I think one of the coolest things about Super Smash Bros. Is that it introduced me to a bunch of Nintendo IPs that I didn't know anything about. For example, the Mother series, which up until that point I had no idea even existed, but they're some of the best games that I've ever played, especially on an emotional level. Earthbound is entirely unique, and it just will change your life. If you haven't played Earthbound yet, go do it. But on top of that, it also introduced me to things like Fire Emblem and F-Zero, which I hadn't played before. So not only is it a great game that plays well and it's really fluid, but on top of it, it also expanded my horizons when it comes to the video games that I like to play.
Number 1.
Now there's one thing that you have to mention when you're talking about Nintendo, and it is my favorite thing about the company, the Game Boy. This is my original Game Boy from when I was a kid. I've kept it all this time, and I always keep Pokemon Blue in the back. The Game Boy is the smartest move that Nintendo has ever made. Not only was it cheap and affordable, it was also nearly indestructible. But most importantly, it allowed you to play all of your favorite franchises on the go. This little thing had Mario, Zelda, Donkey Kong, Kirby, and Pokemon, which sold Game Boys in itself. Not to mention other greats like Castlevania and Metroid. The Game Boy was awesome. It's really funny thinking back now, and especially when looking at the screen. I mean, you can just tell, like, it's not really good. I don't play my Game Boy, especially this one, very much anymore, though I never leave the house without a portable gaming device. And that's one of the best things about Nintendo, is that they've consistently dominated the handheld portable market. And with that came great innovation. So you didn't like how fat the original Game Boy was, you didn't like that the screen was green, well, then you got your Game Boy Pocket, which is basically the same thing. It's got a little bit of a bigger screen, and it was black and white. The problem with that is it didn't have color. So now you got your Game Boy Color, which is fucking pretty cool looking. I remember when I got this, and it's got a little bit more weight to it. It feels good too. Maybe that didn't have the best sprite ratio, so then you move up to 32 bits with the Game Boy Advance. Now, issue with the Game Boy Advance, doesn't have a backlight. So how do you solve that problem? Game Boy SP has a backlight that you can not only fucking turn on and off, but it also has rechargeable batteries, so you don't have to be spending money on batteries constantly. Now, I guess this didn't have two screens, which was a problem, so you got your original Nintendo DS. Now, maybe this Nintendo DS was a little too fat, so then you got your DSi, which also has internet and a little touch screen, and it feels real good. So this thing, the problem with it was that it didn't have 3D, so now you got your 3DS, which can play games that, I mean, I don't know the bitrate on these things, but like pretty good, better than N64 graphics, which is impressive. Now across Nintendo's handheld platforms, they have thousands and thousands of games, and some of them are better than their actual console games. But one of the greatest things that's going on right now is that Nintendo has merged their amazing consoles with their amazing handheld consoles, and we have the Nintendo Switch. Boom, all in one. I like that Nintendo does these kinds of things. A lot of people sees it as gimmicky, but I just see it as a company trying to go in a different direction. And unfortunately, I generally follow in that direction. Join me next time when we talk about why I fucking hate Nintendo. Hey guys, thanks so much for sticking around till the end. I hope you enjoyed my top 10 as much as I enjoyed making it. Now I know this video is a little bit different than the two that we've put out in the past couple weeks, but this is the other kind of thing that we like to do, is more face cam and talking to our subscribers. We appreciate you guys, and because of that, we have decided that we are going to open up a Death Mountaineers Discord where you guys can talk to us and we can all hang out, have a good time, and come up with new ideas for the channel. Speaking of which, let me know in the comments below what your favorite video game company is and what your favorite console is. I found that stuff really cool, so reading your comments is a ton of fun. Obviously, we love doing our theories and our reviews, and we want to do more, and we are going to do more. But if there's something in particular that you guys would like to see, please let us know down below. And if you haven't yet, make sure that you subscribe to the channel, you leave us a like if you liked the video, and you tell all your friends. Make sure to check us out on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. All that information is down below, and we will see you guys next time. Thanks so much for watching.